My mother ripped apart my 8-year-old stepdaughter's toy, the last gift from her late mother, and sneered, "Enough with this junk, your mom's dead, time to get over it." My sister nodded in agreement. I didn't cry, I acted. 2 weeks later, they were the ones crying. My name's Rachel Quinn, I'm 34 years old. I'm in a tidy dining room in a suburban house for a quiet family dinner. The air is thick with the smell of over-roasted chicken and the polite, empty chatter my family specializes in. The table hums with the low talk and the clinking of cutlery against porcelain plates. That's when my mom snatches the threadbare stuffed rabbit from my stepdaughter's lap. She rips the main seam with a sharp, practiced tug and sneers, her voice like ice, that it's time to throw away childish grief. My stepdaughter, Lily Carter, screams, a sound that shatters the room's fragile peace. My husband's chair scrapes hard against the wood floor. My dad just stares down at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his mashed potatoes. My sister, Jenna Quinn, rolls her eyes. The sound of the tearing fabric is somehow louder than anything else. In that single, echoing moment, I stand up. I put myself between the child I love and the woman who just hurt her on purpose. And I realize, with a clarity that feels like a slap, that I've been paying all their bills just to buy a silence that doesn't protect anyone at all. Before I tell you how this one moment exploded my family and how I turned their favorite party of the year into my line in the sand, tell me where you're listening from. Drop your city and country in the comments, subscribe, and switch on notifications for more family revenge stories. My week always began the same way, long before everything broke. The alarm on my phone would buzz at 6:10 a.m., a gentle chime I'd set so as not to wake the house. I'd slip out of bed, tiptoe to the kitchen, and start the quiet ritual of packing a lunchbox. Apple slices arranged in a fan, a small container of crackers, a cheese stick, the simple foods an 8-year-old would actually eat. I'd tie a shoelace on a tiny sneaker with a double knot, a silent prayer that it wouldn't come undone on the playground. I always left for work early, but not before sending a quick text to my husband, Ben Carter. It was usually a photo of something small and beautiful Lily, my 8-year-old stepdaughter, had noticed on the drive to school. This morning, it was a rainbow so faint it looked like a watercolor smudge against the gray sky. Once I was at my desk, before my real work began, I'd open my personal banking app. It was a habit. I'd pay our household bills first, the mortgage on our small, comfortable home, the electricity, the water. Then my eyes would drift to the scheduled payments, the automatic transfers feeding my parents' life. It was a steady, relentless drip, $11.50 for their oversized mortgage sent on the first of every month. $248 for their country club dues because, as Mom always said, they needed to stay connected. $89 for Mom's beauty plan, a subscription box of creams and serums that she insisted was about wellness. And then there was the $125 minimum payment on my sister's credit card, a debt I was still chipping away at. I'd mark the coming weekend on our shared digital calendar. Quiet dinner at Mom and Dad's. I knew from years of experience it would be anything but quiet. It would be staged, a performance where I was expected to play my part. I always kept a small pack of tissues in my purse for Lily. Grief waves don't tell time, and they often crashed hardest when she was tired or overwhelmed. I'd gotten good at dodging calls from Mom during work hours. She treated my job like a hobby she found mildly interesting and her wants like 4-alarm emergencies. At night, after dinner and homework, I'd carve out 20 minutes to read to Lily from a dog-eared book, her worn stuffed rabbit tucked securely under her chin. Its soft, faded fur was a constant presence. And I'd fall asleep most nights thinking that if I just kept paying, if I kept sending the money and answering the calls and showing up for the dinners, maybe the storms would stay outside our door. The numbers were a quiet hum under the surface of my life. A constant financial drain I'd justified for so long it had started to feel normal. The biggest one was the $11.50 I sent every single month toward Mom and Dad's mortgage. It was on autopay, linked directly to my checking account, a silent transfer that ensured their house, a house far too big for two people, was never at risk. Then there was the $248 for the country club. They needed to stay connected, Mom would say, which was code for needing a place to see and be seen, to maintain the illusion of a life they couldn't actually afford. Next came the $89 a month for Mom's beauty plan. It was coded as a wellness charge on my credit card, a little piece of semantic trickery that made it feel less frivolous, though we both knew it was just expensive face cream. For my sister Jenna, it was a steady $125 minimum payment on her credit card. I'd helped her get the card years ago just for the short term, she'd promised. The short term never ended. On top of that were the seasonal fees for my nephew, Caleb Quinn. His travel hockey was his life, and my sister made sure I knew it. This season's fee was $1180, a bill I'd already prepaid just like I had the year before and the year before that. There were other things, smaller amounts I'd almost stopped noticing. A streaming bundle for Dad so he could watch his sports channels. A boutique membership Mom had forgotten to cancel but still used. A pet grooming subscription, even though their old dog had passed away 2 years ago. I tracked it all in a basic spreadsheet I'd created, which I'd grimly labeled Family Peace. Sometimes, late at night when I was tired and my guard was down, the title would make me let out a short, bitter laugh. I told myself I was doing it for them. I was protecting my dad's blood pressure, giving my sister's kid a chance to play a sport he loved, and managing my mom's explosive temper, all with my paycheck. I was the family shock absorber, and it was costing me a fortune. Our house, the one I shared with Ben and Lily, was different. It was smaller, quieter, and honest. Ben, my husband, is the kind of steady you can build a life on. He's the sort of tired that still finds the energy to make dinner when I'm running late, the kind of man who will stop me on my way out the door and ask if I drank enough water today. He sees the small things. Lily is 8 and she's careful with her words but wild with her drawings. She processes the world through colored pencils and watercolors. She paints her stuffed rabbit, Bun, on everything, on birthday cards, on the corner of her homework, on misty bathroom mirrors. Her mom gave her that rabbit before she passed away, and it's more than a toy, it's a tangible piece of a person she's terrified of forgetting. We keep a small, sturdy box on the bookshelf labeled Keep Forever. Inside are photos of Lily's late mom, a few handwritten notes, a pressed flower from her favorite park. I never, ever try to replace her. My job isn't to fill that space. My job is to be the person who never, ever laughs at her grief. Our rules at home are simple. Say the truth, even when it's hard. Keep your hands kind. And if you break something, you do your best to fix it. On her hardest nights, the ones where the missing feels like a physical ache, Lily will press the rabbit into her cheek and fall asleep on our couch, curled under a soft blanket. I keep a tiny sewing kit in the kitchen junk drawer specifically for that rabbit. Seams pop when you wish they wouldn't, especially on something loved that hard. I've stitched up an ear, a paw, and the small felt nose more times than I can count. My promise to her, spoken and unspoken, is this: if something hurts you, if someone is unkind, I will stand up so you don't have to. Our little family of 3 wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were building something safe, a place where scars weren't something to hide. The family I came from was built on something else entirely. They ran on a status machine, and I was the one who kept it fueled. For Mom, appearances were a religion. It was always photos before feelings, invitations before apologies. She collected social events like trophies, and every holiday was a performance piece staged for an audience of neighbors and distant relatives. Dad just drifted in her wake, a quiet, tired man who was good at folding chairs and paying for the extra bottle of wine he hadn't ordered. He enabled her, not with enthusiasm but with a deep, weary resignation. My sister Jenna learned early how the system worked. She learned to point, to accuse, and to float. She knew the current always pulled in her favor because she was the golden child, the easy one. Mom and Dad talked about our image like it was a 4th child, a hungry, loud, demanding child that was never satisfied. My job, something I'd worked hard for and was proud of, was just another prop for their show. "Our daughter Rachel does so well, she helps the whole family," Mom would say to anyone who would listen, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet pride. It was a carefully crafted narrative that made me sound generous and them sound deserving. I was praised when I paid on time, I was difficult when I hesitated. If I ever tried to set a boundary, even a small one like saying I couldn't make a last-minute dinner, it was immediately framed as, "You're abandoning us." The emotional guilt was a currency they spent freely. So, I learned to do without. I drove an older car, I put less into my own retirement, I skipped vacations Ben and I dreamed of, also they didn't have to face the consequences of their own choices. I was funding a performance and I was getting tired of the show. The invitation came late in the week, a casual text from Mom, "Just the family, just dinner, no fuss." Saturday at 7. The tone was sweet, practiced, and a little too smooth. It was the voice she used when she wanted something, the verbal equivalent of patting you on the head to soothe you before delivering the bad news. My internal alarms went off immediately. I made a few notes to self in my head: no money talk at the table. No matter what, I wouldn't get drawn into a conversation about their finances. And most importantly, I'd keep Lily away from any conversations that treated her grief like it was on a timeline, something she should be over by now. As we got ready to leave that Saturday, I slipped my small stitching kit into my purse. The rabbit's left ear had a loose thread, and I figured I could fix it quietly if Lily got distracted. When we arrived, the house smelled of roast chicken and strong lemon cleaner, Mom's signature combination for staging sincerity. It was her way of presenting a perfect, sterile environment, as if a clean countertop could erase all the messy emotions underneath. The assignment started the moment we walked through the door. Dad was sent to pour drinks. My sister directed the seating arrangements, placing herself next to Mom, as always. Mom took Lily's plate to fill it for her, a gesture that looked like kindness but was really about control. I made sure to sit with my back to the hallway, a strategic position that let me keep an eye on my stepdaughter at all times. I felt a familiar tension settle in my shoulders, the pre-show jitters of a performance I never auditioned for. And I made a silent promise to myself, a line I drew in the sand of my own mind. If anyone at all, handles her carelessly tonight, this whole routine ends. For good. We took our seats at the polished dining room table, the one reserved for holidays and these quiet family dinners. Lily, my stepdaughter, carefully slid the worn stuffed rabbit into her lap, its button eyes peeking out from under the tablecloth. It was her anchor in unfamiliar waters. Across the table, Mom watched the rabbit like it was a piece of dirty laundry in an otherwise pristine white room. Her lips were a thin, tight line. I saw my sister Jenna flash a quick, knowing smirk when Lily gently refused to put the rabbit on an empty chair beside her. The conversation was strained, a collection of empty questions about work and weather. Then, the fragile piece shattered. Mom reached across the table, her movements sharp and sudden, and grabbed the rabbit from Lily's lap. There was no warning, no request, just a swift, possessive snatch. The sound of old stitches giving way was small but horribly violent, a tearing sound that cut through the clinking of forks. "It's time to stop this act," Mom said, her voice cold and flat. She held up the now torn rabbit. "It's time to throw away all this childish grief." Lily's mouth opened, but for a split second no sound came out. It was a silent, horrified cry that I will never ever unsee, and in that instant I stood up. I pushed my chair back and said, "No, it wasn't a plea, it wasn't a negotiation, it was a verdict." The scrape of my husband's chair against the hardwood floor was the next sound to break the silence. Ben was on his feet in a second, moving around the table to Lily. He wrapped one strong arm around her shaking shoulders and gently turned her face into his chest, shielding her from the scene. "Margaret," my dad muttered, using my mom's first name under his breath, a weak protest from a man who had made a lifetime of them. It was as if saying her name from a distance could somehow undo what she had just done. My sister Jenna didn't even look at Lily. Her gaze was fixed on me, her expression a mixture of annoyance and disdain. "You can't keep babying her, Rachel," she said, her voice sharp. "She has to learn." I ignored her completely. My focus was on getting my family out of that house. "We're leaving," I said, my voice low and steady. I reached down and gathered the torn pieces of the rabbit from the floor, then collected our bags from the entryway. Mom snapped, her composure finally breaking. "You're overreacting, she needs tough love." I turned back to face her, the torn fabric clutched in my hand. Tough love doesn't tear a child's last gift from her dead parent to shreds in front of everyone. Lily was shaking beside me, one small hand clutching my sleeve, the other holding onto the piece of the rabbit I'd given her. We walked out the front door, leaving behind the sound of scooting chairs and someone calling my name. It sounded like a warning, one I had absolutely no intention of heeding. Back at our house, the silence felt heavy but safe. Ben got Lily a glass of water while I pulled out the small sewing kit from my purse and cleared off our kitchen table. I sat Lily down in the chair beside me under the warm glow of the pendant light. I spread the torn pieces of the rabbit out on the wood. "You know," I said softly, "every scar tells a story of survival. It shows that something was hurt, but it healed. It got strong again." She watched my hands as I threaded a needle. I began to stitch the main seam back together, making my stitches deliberate and a little thick. I didn't want the repair to be invisible. I wanted it to be a badge, a visible reminder of strength, not a secret to be hidden away. As my needle moved through the old, soft fabric, it caught on a tiny, unfamiliar ridge. I paused, running my finger over the spot. It felt like a small, reinforced pocket stitched carefully into the lining from the inside. I gently worked the seam open and peered inside. There, folded into a tiny, tight square, was a piece of paper, softened and worn by years of being tucked away. I carefully unfolded it. Written in faded blue ink were two simple words. "Brave heart." Lily read it out loud, her voice barely a whisper. Then she took the now-repaired rabbit and pressed it to her chest, holding it tight. "We'll keep the seam and the note together," I whispered back to her. "A promise and a map." And right then, before the last stitch was even pulled tight, I made my decision. The payments, all of them, would end in the morning. I was up before the sun, a mug of coffee steaming beside me on the desk. The house was quiet, still wrapped in the blue light of dawn. I logged into my bank's website, the familiar screen glowing in the dark room. With a steady hand, I navigated to the automatic payments page. The first one on the list was the $1150 monthly transfer for Mom and Dad's mortgage. I clicked Cancel. A confirmation box popped up asking if I was sure I was. Next, the $248 for the country club dues. The account history showed I'd been paying it for 18 consecutive months. I stopped that one too. Then, the $89 monthly beauty plan, that recurring charge I had never explicitly consented to but had tolerated for the sake of peace. Cancelled. I moved on to my sister's credit card, stopping the $125 minimum payment and, for good measure, removing my card information entirely from her account. Then I opened my email. I composed a short, polite message to the youth hockey board, formally withdrawing my nephew from the upcoming season. I didn't give a reason. I just stated that we would no longer be funding the $1180 fee. My last digital task was to adjust our summer beach trip. I had been planning to take my parents, a yearly tradition I paid for. I logged into the airline's website and changed the booking from 4 tickets to 3, one for me, one for my husband, and one for Lily. For every single action, I took a screenshot, saving each image to a new folder on my computer labeled Records. As the sun began to rise outside my window, I felt a profound shift inside me. The weight wasn't gone, but it had changed. I was no longer making quiet payments to keep louder people quiet. I was taking back control. My phone lit up at 8:12 a.m. It was Mom. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. I ignored it. The third time, I knew she wouldn't stop. A voicemail notification popped up. Her voice was strained, artificially casual. "Rachel, honey, just calling to see if there's a mistake with the bank. The mortgage payment didn't go through. Call me back." I took a deep breath and called her back. I didn't give her time for pleasantries. "Hi, Mom, there's no mistake." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. Then, her voice hardened. "What are you talking about? You can't be serious. You're punishing the entire family for one simple moment." I kept my own voice level. "Ripping a grieving child's most precious belonging apart isn't a simple moment, Mom. It's cruelty, and the payments are over." She immediately pivoted, her voice rising with practiced panic. "What about your father's stress levels? What will people think when we can't pay our bills?" "You're being selfish." I held the phone tight, my knuckles white. "I will not finance your behavior or your image any longer. This is my boundary." There was a sharp intake of breath, and then she hung up. But not before spitting out a final parting shot, a curse she clearly expected me to fear. "You'll regret this." It didn't take long for my sister to join the attack. A text message appeared on my screen an hour later. "Caleb can't miss hockey. He's been looking forward to it all year. Fix it." I typed back a simple, clear response. "I'm not paying. You are his parent." Her reply came back instantly, a rapid-fire burst of accusations. It was unfair. I was being selfish. I owed them. It was money I could easily afford. I took a moment before responding, choosing my words carefully. "I don't owe you anything, Jenna. I helped you." That seemed to make her even angrier. She insisted I had humiliated her by pulling Caleb from the team without warning. She said the other parents would talk. I refused to get pulled into her drama. "Call the coach," I texted back. "Make a plan you can afford." Of course, she didn't. That would require taking responsibility. Instead, she called Mom, and a few minutes later, the family group chat lit up with a storm of notifications. I didn't even read them. I just opened the chat settings and silenced it. Then I went to the kitchen and started making pancakes for Lily. I was choosing peace, but this time it would be peace inside my own walls on my own terms. That night, Ben and I sat down at the kitchen table after Lily was in bed. We pulled up our own budget on his laptop. It was one simple page with no secrets and no hidden columns. We looked at the extra money we now had each month, the money that had been flowing out to my family. We created a small weekly treat fund for Lily, enough for a new set of art supplies or an ice cream after school on Fridays. It felt good to redirect that money towards something that brought joy instead of just quiet resentment. Then, we made a plan. We went through our phones and unfollowed the social media accounts that made my world feel loud and full of sirens. I took a sticky note and wrote "Brave Heart" on it in my best imitation of Lily's careful handwriting, and I stuck it on the inside of our front door. We agreed on a new set of rules for interacting with my family. We would take a maximum of one call a day from my mom or dad. There would be no more on-demand, unannounced visits. The next day, I called Lily's school and updated her pickup permissions, making it clear that only Ben and I were authorized to take her home. That evening, we turned our phones to the Do Not Disturb setting during dinner. The silence was wonderful. We added 2 new routines to our week: a nightly check-in with Lily, just a few minutes to ask how her heart was feeling, and a long walk together as a family every Saturday morning. We were stabilizing our house first, building up our own defenses before the next wave hit. We knew it was coming. It came that very evening. A series of loud, insistent knocks echoed through our small house. It was Mom, knocking like a landlord demanding rent. Through the peephole, I could see my sister Jenna lingering on the sidewalk, arms folded across her chest in a posture of pure defiance. Dad was there too, standing a few feet behind Mom, looking sick to his stomach and refusing to meet my eyes through the distorted glass. I took a breath and opened the door, but only partway, leaving the security chain latched. Mom started with a tight, brittle smile. "Rachel, we need to talk. I'm sorry about the rabbit. It was old and She trailed off, her thin apology blaming the victim. I kept my voice calm and low. "The payments are not starting again, and you will not have access to Lily unless you can show genuine kindness." Mom's fake smile vanished. She scoffed. "You're tearing this family apart over a toy," my patience snapped. "It is not a toy," I said, my voice sharp and clear. It is a bridge to someone she lost, a bridge you took a pair of scissors to. I saw her open her mouth to argue, to demand, to bully her way back into control. She demanded I go online right now and fix the bills. I didn't let her. I simply closed the door, sliding the deadbolt into place. The click was loud and final. I knew then that our private boundaries would have to become formal ones. 2 days later, my phone rang as I was waiting in the school pickup line. It was the main office. "Mrs. Carter, could you please come inside? There's been a small incident." My heart hammered against my ribs. I parked the car and rushed in. The school secretary, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, led me to the counselor's office. Lily was sitting in a small chair, pale and silent, clinging to her repaired rabbit. My mom had shown up at the school unannounced. She had waited near the front steps at dismissal and pulled Lily aside before anyone could stop her. A teacher's aide who was on duty had intervened when she overheard my mom telling Lily, an 8-year-old child, that she broke the family. My knees felt weak. I knelt down to Lily's level. "Hey, sweet girl," I said softly, tucking a piece of hair behind her ear. "You did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing. This is not your fault." I stood up and asked the office for a written incident note. I also confirmed that there were security cameras near the main entrance that would have captured the whole thing. I walked Lily out through a side door, my arm wrapped tightly around her, specifically to avoid seeing Mom, who I could see was still circling the parking lot in her car like a shark. As I buckled Lily into her booster seat, I said the words out loud to myself, a promise etched in steel: "We're done with warnings." The next morning, Ben took the day off work and went with me to the courthouse. The building was old and imposing, but my resolve was solid. When it was my turn, I walked up to the clerk's window and explained the situation clearly and briefly, without any emotional speeches. I described the incident at the school, the unannounced visit to our home, and the pattern of harassment. I filled out the paperwork to file for a restraining order, a legal document that would protect Lily at our home and at her school. I included Mom's name and my sister's, adding their recent text messages and calls to the form as context for their escalating behavior. Back at the school, I handed a copy of the temporary order to the principal. We updated Lily's pickup permissions again, this time with a legal document to back it up. The principal assured me that the staff would be briefed and that no one would release Lily to anyone but us, no exceptions. That evening, Ben and I sat down with Lily and created a simple safety code word. If anyone ever made her feel unsafe or uncomfortable, she could use that word and we would come get her, no questions asked. I explained the restraining order to her in the simplest terms I could. "This is a piece of paper that tells some grown-ups they have to use their listening ears and give you space," I said. "It's a tool to keep you safe from their bad choices." The explosion in the family group thread was immediate and spectacular. Mom's text came first: "I can't believe you would do this to your own mother, a restraining order." "Are you insane?" My sister's followed a minute later. "Take it back right now, you are ruining everything for everyone." Then a single, quiet line from my dad: "Can we talk?" He went silent immediately after, a digital ghost. I crafted one single response and sent it to the group. "Paper boundaries are now replacing the verbal ones that were broken." The dam of their fury broke. Mom claimed I was lying, that she was just trying to talk to her own granddaughter. My sister threatened to tell everyone that I was unstable and vindictive. I muted the thread. Then I set up an auto-reply on my text messages from their numbers that read: "For record-keeping, please communicate through email only." I created a new folder in my cloud storage right next to the records folder. I labeled this one Keep. I screenshotted every vicious message and saved it. I told my husband that night, "I'm not debating feelings with people who refuse to acknowledge their actions." The fear, however, found its way into our home. Lily's nightmares came back. She started asking to sleep with the hallway light on again, a habit she'd outgrown months ago. One night, as I was tucking her in, she held up the rabbit. "The seam looks ugly," she whispered, her finger tracing the thick thread I'd used. I sat on the edge of her bed. I think it looks strong, I told her. It's a reminder that it survived, it didn't break forever. The next morning, I sent an email to Mrs. Evans, the school counselor. I asked if there were any small grief support groups at the school. She replied within the hour, her email full of warmth. She said there wasn't a formal one, but she would be happy to meet with me to design something. That afternoon, Lily was sitting at the kitchen table, drawing. She drew a big heart, and right through the center she drew a jagged, stitched line just like the one on her rabbit. Across the top she wrote the word brave. An idea began to form in my mind. What if we helped other kids like you? I asked her gently. Kids who are missing someone. Her eyes lit up. Like a club, she asked. We named it together right there at the kitchen table, the Brave Heart Club. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. We were starting to turn the pain outward, transforming it into care. While I was gathering paperwork for the restraining order, looking through old bank statements and receipts to make sure everything was neat, I found something small and stupid that hit me harder than it had any right to. Tucked between a utility bill and a dinner receipt was a charge, $329 at a boutique, under Jenna's name on a card I'd thought I'd closed years ago. The date lined up with a month when I'd gone extra on Mom and Dad's mortgage because they'd fallen behind. I sat there on the couch with the pile of papers and the sun coming through the blinds and felt the color drain from my face. It wasn't the money, it was the shape of the thing. A pattern, the way my help had become an automatic pipeline for other people's choices. I thought back to all the little expenses I'd shrugged off, one more payment here, one more short-term favor there, and how each had taught them that I'd always fill the gap. I felt stupid for being surprised but also furious. That moment in the dining room had been loud and ugly. This was quiet and just as violent. I called Jenna. My voice was steady because I'd practiced calm, but my hands were shaking. She answered like she always did, like I was the person who owed her something. What charge? She asked. There was no guilt in her voice, just annoyance at being disturbed. I told her the date, the amount, and that the card had been mine. She said, "You said you'd help that month." It was the kind of answer that refuses to see anything but its own version of the world. I read back texts I'd saved, her promises to pay me back that never arrived. Her tone sharpened. She said I was accusing her. I told her I wasn't accusing, I was documenting. I needed to know if she recognized the charge because I didn't. After I hung up, I called the bank and asked to speak with someone about a questionable charge. I didn't use big words. I said simply, this card was closed. I'm listed as the owner and there's a charge under my name that I did not authorize. They put me on hold, and while I waited, I opened the Keep folder on my laptop and added a new file. I dragged the statement screenshot in and labeled it, Jenna Boutique charge, date, amount. I wrote the short email to her I'd been drafting in my head. This is on my records, please explain. I didn't expect an apology. I expected silence or a shrug. Either way, it mattered in the ledger of things. That little charge, the tiny misdirection of money, turned my irritation into resolve. It snapped a wire inside me that had been shorted for years. If their household was a machine built on my payments, that machine had fed itself on entitlement. I'd been polite about it for too long. This was concrete evidence I wasn't being generous, I was being used. I closed my laptop and felt something settle. The line I'd drawn the night of the dinner wasn't a threat anymore, it was a plan. The next morning I walked into the school counselor's office with Lily by my side. The room smelled faintly of crayons and lemon cleaner, and the walls were covered in drawings, houses, stick figure families, bright suns. Mrs. Evans had a clipboard and a softness that made it easy to explain the idea without any strings attached. We sat around her small round table and talked in practical terms. I told her I wanted a small lunch group, no more than 6 kids, where they could come once a week and talk about missing someone or draw or just be with adults who knew how to listen. She nodded and started listing things off the way teachers do: time limits, confidentiality, a letter to send home to parents explaining the group. We sketched the outline right there. Topics would include telling your story if you wanted to, what to do on birthdays and holidays, ways to keep a memory alive, and ways to handle the mean stuff people sometimes say. Supplies would be simple. A box of journals, kid-safe scissors, markers, a tissue box that never got empty, and reassuring picture books about grief that didn't talk down to kids. Mrs. Evans liked the idea of a ritual, something small and steady, so we decided each child would pick a heart sticker with a stitched line printed on it and place it in their journal on the first day. The sticker would be a sign that everyone in the group carried a similar kind of courage. I told her I could volunteer twice a month, mostly to help with materials and to be there for the kids if needed. She looked relieved. "We need that," she said. "Parents often don't know how to start." We added a brave note box where kids could drop a piece of paper with something they wanted to say but couldn't speak out loud. Mrs. Evans suggested we keep the group small at first and invite only kids who'd been recommended by teachers or counselors, no public announcements, no social media posts. I liked that. I wanted a place that felt safe, not staged. Lily was quiet through most of it, her small hand curled around mine. When we left, she walked a little taller, like she'd just signed up for something that mattered. We stopped for hot chocolate on the way home, and she hugged the repaired rabbit to her chest. The plan had a shape now, a weekly meeting room, a shelf of books, little comfort kits. It was small, but it was ours to build. We were stepping out of their orbit and into a circle that wrapped around the people who actually needed protection. That same week, I called the Riverbend Neighborhood Foundation and asked to speak with someone about our neighborhood gala. The woman who answered the phone was warm and efficient. She asked how she could help. I told her a table in my name might no longer be needed. I kept my voice calm and factual. "Please cancel any table reservation tied to my card," I said. I could hear the microsecond of surprise on the other end. People assumed I was just changing plans. I didn't correct them. After the table was canceled, I explained what I wanted to do instead. I asked about donating to a program that supported grief resources in local schools. I didn't want to make a spectacle. I wanted a practical, direct contribution that would fund books and comfort kits at Lily's school. The program director, James, was quiet for a beat and then offered several options. I settled on a $5,000 gift. It was more than the table cost, and it would do something that mattered. I requested that the funds be directed to a small mini library of grief books for elementary readers, a shelf with picture books and early chapter books, plus a supply of comfort kits, soft blankets, journals, crayons, and note cards kids could use to send notes to each other. I was careful with the wording. I didn't want it framed as a punishment or a public shame, and I didn't want my family's names blasted across a program as a punchline. I asked the foundation to keep the donor anonymous in the printed program if possible, but to allow a dedication line to be read by the MC during the gala. The line would be short and specific. "In honor of a brave mother whose love still leads her daughter." It would say everything without saying their names. I wanted the focus to be on the mother who had loved Lily, not on the family drama. James asked if I planned to attend the gala. I shook my head without thinking and then smiled at Lily, who was tracing a seam on her rabbit. "We'll be there," I told him, "but not for spectacle, just to support the program and to show the kids someone cares." He agreed to arrange a small display of the books and a sample comfort kit for the event. I felt a faint, steady sense of rightness settle in my chest. This was no longer about humiliation. It was a redirection of resources. Money that had been feeding a machine would now feed something that healed. Next, I started drafting what the dedication could say, keeping the language plain and true. I wanted it to be brief but honest, a sentence that would give the gift a face without turning it into a story about revenge. The words I chose were ordinary but chosen with care, for the children who keep carrying love and for the mothers who taught them how. I sent that to James and asked him to place it where parents and teachers would see it, not on the big stage but on the program card and at the small display. I asked the foundation not to invite my family to speak or to be acknowledged. This wasn't about applause for me. It was about building a tiny place in the world where kids like Lily could find a book and a warm blanket when nights got hard. I told Lily we would keep our part quiet. We planned a simple reveal of the Brave Heart shelf at her school with no cameras, no speeches, and only the kids and staff. She wanted to cut a ribbon, so I let her practice with a shoelace. We decided I wouldn't make a speech at the gala. I would stand in the back with Ben and watch the MC read the dedication. Afterward, we would go for ice cream. It felt small and exact, like a secret shared between people who knew what really mattered. Dad and I met at a small coffee shop 2 blocks from their house, the kind with mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu. He looked smaller in daylight, like the slow collapse of someone who'd stopped trying to carry a weight he never chose. He rubbed both hands around his coffee cup like it was warm armor. We sat at a corner table where the sun made a square on the worn wood. I started with the easy thing, "I love you." I had to say it first so he didn't hear only the list of complaints that could make him shrink back. He said it back quiet, and for a second we were just 2 people with a past. Then I told him what I needed. I told him I wasn't going to pay Mom's bills anymore. I told him I wasn't going to be the family bank. He looked at me like I'd told him the sky had changed color. "I know," he said finally. His voice sounded like it had been in his throat a long time. "I should have done more that night. I didn't want apologies, I wanted action." I slid a printed list across the table. No surprise visits, no messages to Lily unless they're kind and written, no sharing our address, no showing up at her school. I watched his fingers tighten around the paper. He nodded and took the list like it was a thing he could fold into his jacket and carry away. "Can you do this?" I asked. "Can you choose quiet, choose kindness?" He swallowed, looked out the window at a delivery truck rolling by, and when he faced me again, his eyes were glassy. "I'll try," he said. "I want to be around for her. I don't want to hurt her." I asked for the house key. He hesitated like it was a betrayal to give it back, then reached into his pocket and handed it across the table. His thumb lingered on the metal for a beat, then he pushed it toward me like a man opening a door he'd kept locked for too long. I put the key into my purse. It felt weighty in that quiet way, less a thing than a promise on paper. We talked about small, reasonable steps. He agreed to 2 short, supervised library visits with Lily, scheduled in advance and managed by the librarian. He promised to pay his own club dues if he wanted to keep going, and I suggested he take the money he would have used for a flashy dinner and buy a book for the Brave Heart shelf instead. He smiled like he might actually do it. When we left, he folded the list and tucked it into his jacket. He kissed my cheek in a way that belonged to both apology and relief. The bridge between us wasn't rebuilt that day, but something small had changed. Dad had choices to make, and for once I wasn't choosing them for him. Back home, I moved on to the lock-in steps I'd been planning for weeks. I sent a short email to the Riverbend Country Club. "Please confirm that memberships are suspended for accounts not current." I wanted a paper trail so their arrival at any event would be met with the same rule their club had always used: pay or don't come in. It felt petty to some part of me, but it also felt necessary. This was the world they'd built on my payments. It was time for them to feel the consequences of their choices. I forwarded the temporary restraining order to the school again and asked them to add it to Lily's file and to post a copy at the front desk. I wanted no loose ends for anyone who thought a rule was optional. I sent one calm, measured email to my family that afternoon. "I will not attend the gala with you. I am making a donation to support grieving kids at Lily's school in her mother's name. Do not approach Lily in person. All communication must be in writing." I hit send and felt oddly light. My sister replied within an hour with a string of angry messages. I blocked her on social media after one public comment calling me a traitor. It stung like slamming a door on someone you once trusted, but I also felt a tight, steady relief. Blocking her didn't erase our history, it just made the history stop controlling our present. I wrote one last message to Mom, short and unshowy: "Do not approach Lily, all communication in writing." I didn't add threats or explanations. There was no need. I bought 2 new books for the Brave Heart shelf with Lily that night, one about bravery, another about remembering, and let her pick the covers. She chose a bright yellow one with a dog on the front and a softer blue one with stars. We put the rabbit on the mantel before bed. The seam caught the lamplight and made a small, shining line. I breathed fully for the first time in weeks. 2 weeks later, the night of the Riverbend Neighborhood Foundation Gala, I sat in the back of the ballroom with Ben and Lily, waiting for the MC to speak. The country club looked exactly as it always had from the inside: bright chandeliers, people in dresses and suits, a low buzz of plates and conversation. But outside, at the valet and the front steps, a smaller drama was playing out. I'd heard the club's policy from the woman at the desk a few days earlier: if dues weren't current, a membership could be suspended. It was ordinary business. I hadn't expected it to feel like a weapon, but when Mom and Jenna arrived in cocktail dresses and nervous smiles, the policy landed with the force of a hinge. They walked up to the host stand, and the attendant, young, efficient, clipboard in hand, checked names and then shook her head. "I'm sorry, your membership is suspended for non-payment," she said, voice clear and practiced. Mom's smile faltered like a picture falling off a wall. Jenna's hand tightened on her clutch. "There must be a mistake," Mom said, the practiced charm slipping into a brittle edge. Jenna tried to claim they were guests of a donor, urgent and loud, but the clipboard didn't change. The attendant repeated the rule and let other guests step ahead. People turned and whispered. I heard the soft sound of a phone calling, then going to voicemail. They tried both numbers in a flush of panic. Both calls were silent rings into my digital distance. The door that had always opened when I paid stayed closed when I didn't. Watching them stand there, beautiful, angry, suddenly ordinary, felt like seeing a sculpture topple in slow motion. The thing they'd always used to measure themselves had stopped moving because its fuel was gone. Inside the ballroom, the music shifted and the MC stepped to the microphone with that practiced, easy smile. He spoke about the foundation's work, after-school programs, scholarships, and then he mentioned a new gift. When they read the dedication I'd requested, something in me tightened and then relaxed all at once. "In honor of a brave mother whose love still leads her daughter," he said. The dedication was quiet, precise, small enough to be true. A table nearby had a display, a few picture books, a sample comfort kit with a little blanket folded in, crayons, and a stack of note cards. It didn't scream, it didn't make a spectacle of anything. It simply existed, a gentle place for people to come and find help. I stood in the back with Ben on my left and Lily's small hand in mine. Her fingers were warm and sticky from the lemonade she'd sipped earlier. She leaned close and whispered, "That's for her." She meant her mother, and in the hush of that room, her meaning landed like a pebble in a quiet pond. The applause that followed was sincere and soft, not the booming kind that inflates egos. It felt like a room of people leaning in to say, "Yes, this matters." I didn't speak. I didn't want the mic. I nodded at the staff member who'd helped me, a young woman with tired eyes and a quick laugh, and she smiled back like she already knew the right thing to do. My phone buzzed in my purse, probably another anger-filled message or a parade of calls, but I left it there and listened to the soft applause. The moment was exactly what I wanted: small, useful, and true. It turned money that had paid for a performance into something that would sit on a shelf for a child who needed it. As the applause faded, I thought about the seam on the rabbit and the tiny note inside it. Brave heart. The words felt less like a slogan and more like a map. I squeezed Lily's hand and felt the steady, small thrum of the life we'd chosen to protect. The crowd murmured and shifted. The room moved on to auction items and small talk. We slipped out the back with everyone else, old life left behind like confetti on the floor. They found me in the hallway as we were slipping out. Mom's face was a hard line, the kind she wore when she needed an audience to believe she was wounded. Jenna's voice was a snarl I recognized from our childhood, all blame and performance. "Did you do this to humiliate us?" Mom demanded, palms up like she was asking for a favor. I could feel Lily's small hand tighten around mine. She was tucked under Ben's arm, eyes wide but steady. The ballroom's chandeliers threw soft light on Mom's pearls and Jenna's new dress, and for a second it looked like a pageant gone wrong. I kept my voice low. "This honors someone you tried to erase in front of a child," I said. The words landed like a small stone. Jenna lunged for the familiar line about loyalty and family and how everything I'd done ruined their plans. She spoke fast and loud about hockey and tables and being embarrassed. Ben shifted so his shoulder was between Lily and them. He didn't need to say anything. The line he drew with his stance said enough. Mom stepped closer. It was the first time since the restraining order that she'd moved that near. I could see the contempt in her eyes, the belief that anger could cancel consequences. I didn't want a scene, but I also didn't want Lily to watch me shrink. Without drama, I reached into my purse, pulled out the paper copy of the order we'd filed, and showed it to the nearest staff member. Her face went calm, apologetic. She stepped in and said quietly to Mom, "You need to give them space." Mom's mouth opened and closed, fury flickering, then burning down into something colder. A staff member hovered, keeping the space between us safe. I said what I'd been rehearsing in my head: "No more contact unless it's kind and in writing. We're done here." Mom's anger folded into a slow, controlled fury, less the dramatic crying I'd seen before, more the quiet calculation of someone who'd lost privilege. Jenna sputtered and threw out a last accusation about me being selfish. I answered the only thing that mattered: loyalty protects the smallest person in the room first. It felt like the truth, simple and immovable. We walked out without fanfare. No one followed. The staff smiled politely at us, the kind of smile that says they've seen worse and they'll do what they can to keep the peace. Outside, the night air felt like a cool hand on the back of my neck. Lily kept her repaired rabbit on her lap, seam visible under the light, and she leaned into me as if we were right where we belonged. We didn't go to the gala after party. We went to an ice cream shop around the corner, the kind with a neon sign that buzzes and a bell on the door that jingles every time someone comes in. The place smelled like sugar and warm waffle cones. Lily picked chocolate with rainbow sprinkles, holding the cone like a small treasure. Ben chose vanilla bean and I took mint because it felt like the simple, ordinary choice of people who wanted a calm night. We sat on the curb outside on an old painted bench. The city noise hummed softly in the background: tires on the road, someone laughing a block over, a car alarm 2 doors down before someone turned it off. Lily plunked her rabbit on her knee and traced the thick thread I'd sewn with a tiny, careful finger. She looked up at me and whispered, "That's for her." I thought about the folded note inside the rabbit, "Brave heart," and felt something that wasn't triumph and wasn't revenge. It was a quiet, steady rightness. I didn't post anything. I didn't clap a photo onto social media or call anyone to say how it unfolded. The win was not for show, it was for Lily. We sat there for a long time, the three of us, and let the quiet be the point. When the cone finally slipped a little and a drip landed on Lily's shoe, she giggled and I laughed with her, and Ben kissed the top of her head. That night, we went home early and slept through without the knot of dread that had lived under my ribs for months. The fallout started online the next morning like a rain you could see coming but hoped would miss your house. Mom posted a vague status about ungrateful children and public betrayal. It had the exact mix of hurt and performative outrage she always used to gather sympathy. Jenna immediately tagged me in a comment thread about family matters and stealing from family, trying to turn our private decisions into a public scandal. The notifications piled up like pebbles. Messages from cousins, a neighbor's gossip forwarded by an acquaintance. I opened my phone, took screenshots of everything, and then closed the app. For a while I sat with the screenshots open on my laptop, the faces and words frozen in little boxes. I saved them in the cloud under the label Keep. That morning felt like a moment to be methodical rather than reactive. I sent one clear group email to the family addresses: all further comments must be written and factual. False claims will be ignored, plain language, no emotion, just the facts. It felt like setting a boundary in writing, a line they couldn't argue around with charm or tears. Their outrage swirled but lacked purchase. I blocked Jenna on social media after she wrote a public post calling me a traitor. It stung the way any severing of ties would sting, but it also felt like removing a screen from my life that constantly buzzed with false alarms. I set my phone to filter calls from unknown numbers and to send an automatic reply to family texts, communicate through email only for record keeping. I printed out the messages and added them to the folder I'd already started, every threatening text, every manipulative voicemail. The folder became less about punishment and more about protection, a record in case anything escalated. Through all of it, I talked less and documented more. I didn't want rumors to write our story, I wanted facts. I forwarded copies of the key documents to the school office and saved them in Lily's file. I ignored the neighbor who stopped me in the grocery store to tell me that people were talking, because the truth didn't need defense in the checkout line. At home, we kept our routines small and steady: homework at the table, dinner with phones set to do not disturb, bedtime stories where Lily chose the book. The home was the point, the rest was noise. A week after the gala, Dad asked to meet me at the park near our house. He looked older than he had 2 weeks before, like someone who'd been carrying weight he didn't know how to set down. He wore his old baseball cap and a sweater with a moth in the sleeve, small things that made him familiar. He sat down on the bench and exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath for years. "I'm sorry I didn't stop it," he said right away, the words tumbling out. It wasn't the dramatic apology that Mom used, it was small and shaken, genuine. He looked at the ground like he had to find courage in the dirt. I told him I appreciated the apology, but that words alone didn't change the hurt. I needed action. I explained that this wasn't bargaining, it was setting a standard. I needed him to choose kindness over performance. I slid a photocopied list across the bench. No surprise visits, no calling Lily without kindness, no posting her photos without asking, scheduled supervised visits only, and his own responsibility to cover any club dues he wished to keep. He read it, fingers tracing the words like a man reading a map for the first time. "I can do that," he said in that worried, honest way he had when he'd tried to fix a broken bicycle years ago. "I don't want to hurt her." I asked if he'd meet me halfway, 2 short, supervised visits at the public library each month with the librarian present and no unsupervised access until he proved he could follow the rule. He nodded, almost eagerly, like someone relieved to have instructions. He promised to pay his own dues at the club if he kept the membership at all. He asked if he could bring a small book for the Brave Heart shelf in Lily's name, and I said yes. I wanted his actions to be about repair, not performance. Then I asked for the house key if he still had it. He reached into his pocket and with shaking hands handed it to me like a confession. It felt heavy in my palm. He hugged me awkwardly, more like a man gripping a life raft than a son wanting to make up for a fight. And then he left, head bowed, like someone who'd been given a list and knew the work ahead would be the proof of his words. When he walked away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Relief because there were small, real steps being taken. Sorrow because the bridge between us had become a road with tolls that should never have been owed in the first place. But even that sorrow felt honest, and honesty felt better than the old performances. I folded the list into my wallet and added a sticky note: 2 library visits supervised by appointment. It was small. It was measurable. It was a beginning. Rumor moved faster than I expected. A neighbor saw Mom at the grocery store the next week and came over to our house the same evening with a tray of brownies and a question she pretended was casual. "Did you really take the table?" she asked, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. I told her the truth. No, I'd redirected the money to the school, and she blinked, a little sheepish. She admitted she'd heard a different version from someone else, the kind that made me out to be the villain. I corrected her once, kindly, then we put the brownies on the counter and opened our night. On mail runs and in the checkout line, people asked the same thing in softer tones. A woman from the PTA stopped me by the carpool line and said, "Some people are talking." I shrugged and answered flatly, "They're allowed to talk. We're choosing to listen to the kids." It was a phrase I liked, that we were listening to the kids, not the noise. Saying it out loud steadied me more than I expected. Meanwhile, the Brave Heart Club filled faster than Mrs. Evans and I thought it would. Teachers quietly recommended children whose stories fit, kids with a parent who'd passed, kids whose parents worked odd hours, kids who'd lost a pet and felt the absence like a hole. At our first meeting, the kids traded crayons and sticky notes and the Brave note box filled with tiny, honest things. I remember my dad's laugh, "I miss stories. It's okay to cry." The school principal emailed me to say thank you and to tell me staff were grateful for the space. That felt like real, measurable good. Gossip still tried to nibble at our edges. Jenna's social posts about family betrayal circulated for a few days, and people pulled at the thread of the story because it was easier than thinking about their own hard choices. But when the neighbor who'd started the rumor bumped into me next week, she dropped the subject and admired the Brave Heart shelf at the school instead. Small corrections repeated made the buzz quiet down. The truth didn't need fireworks. It needed a steady, calm voice and a shelf of books for kids to find when nights felt long. The week Caleb was supposed to leave for camp, his face showed up at our kitchen window, pressed against the glass like he was hoping I'd miraculously unlock the world for him. He looked smaller than I remembered in the glare of late afternoon. He'd heard the rumor too, and he'd come because kids go to different places when adults are fighting. I invited him in and set out cookies. He sat at the table and asked, without pretense, "Why aren't I going to camp?" His voice was small and blunt. There was nothing theatrical about it. It was a kid trying to understand. I told him the truth in the simplest way I could. Grown-ups pay for what they choose. Right now I'm choosing to put that money where kids can get help when they miss someone. He chewed a cookie and frowned. "But I wanted to go," he said. He said it like it was a fact, like the world ought to comply with his wishes. I didn't soften the boundary with excuses or secret payments. I couldn't. It would have been like pouring water back into a bucket with holes. "It's okay to be mad," I told him. "It's okay to say that it's unfair." I put my hand on his knee. "Your mom is the one who has to sign up for camp. If she wants you to go, she'll figure it out." He looked down and then up at me with that fierce, brief look kids have when they're deciding if someone is friend or not. "Am I in trouble?" he asked. My chest tightened because I wanted to fix it for him, to be the aunt who made everything right. But I remembered the seam on Lily's rabbit, the little stitched pocket with the note inside. I thought about what kind of message it sent if I paid to smooth everything over while the pattern that caused it stayed the same. "No," I said, "you're not in trouble. This is about grown-ups making different choices." I offered him an alternative. "We could go to the park and shoot pucks. I'd take him for one afternoon, help him practice." He brightened at that, the way a sun comes through a cloud for a minute. He said maybe he'd like that. I wrote him a text later with an offer for Sunday afternoon at the rink. It wasn't the same as camp, but it was something real. And I didn't hide behind a secret payment to smooth the edges. I messaged Jenna plainly. "Keep me out of the camp conversation. Parent your child." She replied with heat and blame, as she always did, and I didn't answer. I logged the exchange and saved the receipt of my decision in the folder where I kept other records, small proof that I wasn't stepping back into old patterns. The ache for Caleb, my nephew who'd once I'd helped, was real and it stung. But repairing that ache with money alone would have taught the wrong lesson, that when people misbehave, someone else should pay to make it better. I wouldn't teach that to any child. At home, the growth we'd worked for showed up in small, steady ways. Lily stopped clenching the rabbit in her fist each night. She started tucking it on her nightstand instead, like a talisman that watched over her when she slept. The sticky note she'd written, "Brave Heart," was on her backpack, and she'd point to it proudly before school. One evening at dinner, she reached across the table and drew a seam on the napkin with her fork, making pretend stitches and saying, "See. Strong." Ben and I both looked at each other and let out a tiny laugh that felt like a release. The Brave Heart Club met in a back corner of the library under a bulletin board decorated with children's art. Mrs. Evans set out journals and crayons and soft tissues in a cereal box with a ribbon. At the first meeting, one little boy read a list he'd written about the things he missed, in a voice that wobbled like a flag in the wind. Another girl shared a memory of a picnic and made everyone laugh. We ended that session with a small ritual. Each child placed a sticker with a stitched heart in their journal. The kids lined up to leave, carrying their journals like tiny treasures. I felt something like relief because I knew these were small, practical things we'd built that would be there long after the posts and the gossip faded. At night, Ben and I spread a paper calendar on the living room floor and circled the dates for our beach trip. It felt different planning it this time. No calls to check if Mom and Dad were free, no mental balancing act on who would use the extra ticket. We packed 3 chairs and a small cooler and talked about what sandcastle we might build. It was ordinary and honest and felt like medicine. There were tests, of course. One evening, after a voicemail from Mom demanding we settle this before you go away, I deleted it without listening. Ben felt the edges of worry. What if this gets worse when we're out of town? We made a plan. We'd give our trusted neighbor an emergency number, and Ben would check his phone once a day for any messages the neighbor thought urgent. It was a small containment plan, nothing dramatic, but it meant we could leave with our heads mostly clear. Then came school open house night, and with it the last push. I pulled into the parking lot and saw Mom standing across the street like a statue, arms folded, the exact set expression she used when she wanted an audience. Jenna stood beside her, phone in hand, recording the moment like it was evidence. They called out my name across a few cars, loud enough to pull ears. "We want to talk like adults," they shouted like it was a challenge. I felt that old reflex, explain, appease, delay, rise up in me like a tide. For a moment my mouth opened to explain the logic of donations and the list of payments and everything I'd done for years. But then I looked at Lily. She was next to me, calm because we'd practiced calm. Ben put his hand on my back and his presence said what my words might not. We were not stepping into that river. I chose motion over argument. I kept walking toward the school door. Their calls tried to snag me, but I moved past like a boat cutting through reeds. I thought of the code word we'd chosen with Lily, the simple safety word that meant "come get me," the way we'd trained our bodies to notice danger and respond without drama. Inside the school, I told the office what I'd seen. I asked them to note the incident, to mark our file, and to tell the teachers to report any attempts at contact. I said the words plainly: "We will file a report if they come again." Walking through the crowded hallway, I felt steady in a way I hadn't a month ago. The last push was a test, not a trap. It proved that the boundaries weren't brittle, they held. Lily looped her arm through mine and I squeezed back. It was enough. I sent one last, calm email and hit send before I could change my mind. Any more in-person appearances near our home or Lily's school would be reported. Plain words, no theatrics. I removed Mom and Jenna from my phone favorites. It felt small and practical, like putting the right tools in the right drawer. I taped an extra copy of our family boundary list inside the hall closet, large letters, black marker, my handwriting. "We do not bargain with people who hurt kids." I folded the note and slid it into the front pocket of my planner where I could see it every morning. Ben nodded when he saw the email thread. He'd been quiet about the logistics, but his quiet had weight. We blocked Jenna on social media after she called me a traitor in a public comment. Blocking felt like closing a window that had been left open to the weather for years. It stung for a minute, cutting someone out of the places they used to live in your life, but the sting was grief turning clean. That night, Lily asked if we could order takeout. Of course we could. We spread a blanket on the living room floor, ordered noodles and dumplings, and ate with our hands like kids. The light from the television made the room cozy and small. We watched a silly show and laughed at the parts Lily liked, the 3 of us side by side on the rug. No phone checked, no messages read. The door felt locked, not like a prison but like a chosen fence that kept our small circle safe. When I finally lay down to sleep, my phone stayed face down on the charger. I fell asleep without scrolling, which felt like a small rebellion and like a relief. For the first time in months, the late-night knot in my chest had loosened. The choice to lock the door was not a punishment so much as a definition of where our family life would begin and end. It was a choice that kept Lily safe, kept us together, and let the old script stop running in the background. The Brave Heart shelf was quieter than a ribbon cutting at a big school and better for it. On the day we installed it, Lily insisted on cutting the small ribbon herself. She took the tiny scissors with both hands the way she does when she's serious about a task and snipped. Her face lit up like a lamp. Only the group kids and school staff stood around the new corner of the library, and their small applause was warm and private. The principal gave a short, honest thank you and helped arrange the books, picture books, early chapter books, and a stack of guides for grown-ups who want to know how to say the right thing. There were soft tissues in a jar by the books and a box of crayons with a little note that read, "Brave notes go here." Underneath the shelf, each child signed their initials with a tiny heart-stitch symbol. They traced the stitch with their fingers afterwards like they were making a pact. Dad came to the first 2 afternoons of the Brave Heart Club with a book under his arm. He kept his visits short and gentle, just him, a story, and a small, proud grin when Lily would show him a drawing. Those library visits were the kind of steady, quiet things that showed up as real change, not flash. He paid his own club dues after that, like a man doing the honest work of owning his own life. At home, the money that used to vanish into our family's image machine began to pad a jar labeled Our Life. We put the extra into a small emergency fund for real things: car repairs, a dentist bill, a weekend when one of us needed to breathe. It felt paternal in a new way, practical and protective. Jenna posted her opinions and accusations on social media for a while longer. The noise came and went. I didn't respond. Ben unfollowed the accounts that made life feel like a contest. We started planning small things: a 3-person beach trip with a cheap cooler and a good book, a sandcastle with a heart pattern on its tower. The planning felt light because it was honest. No one else needed to be included. We went to the beach as planned. Lily tucked the rabbit under her hat and ran, the seam showing like a little stripe of pride. She laughed when the wind tried to lift her hat and when the tide tried to take our sandcastle down. At sunset, she sat on my lap and leaned her head against me. The light caught the rabbit's seam and turned it into a silver line. Dad kept his 2 short library visits on time, calm, and kind. He learned how to buy a single book instead of a grand gesture, and how the small right thing mattered more than a performance. Who protects their own? The answer narrowed down to simple, visible choices. The cost of those choices was real: relatives who no longer visited, a nephew who missed a camp he'd wanted, a mother who chose status over softness and then watched some of it slip away. Those were real losses, and I don't waste energy pretending otherwise. But the result was also real: a child who sleeps through the night without clutching a toy like a lifeline, a husband who smiles more because he doesn't carry my emotional load, and a bank account that no longer acts like a leash tied to someone else's comfort. The seam on the rabbit stayed visible by choice. Lily liked it that way. She'd finger the thick stitches and say, "See, strong," and mean it. Proof, not shame. Sometimes I pass the building where the gala was held and it looks like any other building when you stop feeding it meaning. The spotlight shrinks without the fuel of our money and attention. I think of the note folded in the rabbit Brave Heart, and it still feels like a map. I stitch a button back on Lily's jacket sometimes, needle-threaded, and hand it to her with a smile. Our life is full of small ceremonies now: a book added to a shelf, a comfort kit restocked, a pizza night where no one calls about bills. The final image I hold close is simple: the rabbit on our mantle in the morning light. The seam catches the sun and glows a little. It's a quiet badge, a mended thing that remembers and yet refuses to be defined by the violence it once held. We kept the scar visible so Lily would always know she survived. That's protection. If this hit close to home, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and share your story. I'll be reading. Subscribe for more real, first-person family revenge stories, and remember, your boundaries can be your brave heart too.